I'm Clinton Riddle from Sweetwater, Tennessee. I was drafted, went in the Army December the 10th, 1942, and I took my basic training down at Camp Wheeler at Macon, Georgia. In high school, I took different classes such as shorthand, typing, and so forth, and I didn't do too well in typing. I think about 33 words per minute that I got. When I arrived down where I took my basic training, I applied for a clerk school. I thought I'd get me a clerk job and wouldn't have to go combat. And I went to school for 6 weeks, a clerk school. I had 6 weeks of basic training, a week of review with a 20-mile hike. And I did really well. I had, I think, about 75 words per minute on typewriter. So I was all set.
You can talk to us. You don't have to look at the camera.
And in the meantime, I applied for OCS, the Officers Training School. And I went before the committee and approved and so forth, and I was ready to go to officer school. But in the meantime, they pulled me out and sent me to Fort Bragg. And when we arrived at Fort Bragg, the bus pulled up in front of the headquarters. The old sergeant came out, cursing, and said, "What in the world is sending these clerks up here? What we need is machine gun and mortarman." So there went my office job. And believe it or not, they put me in the MPs to start with. And I was in there for quite a while, and I suddenly discovered I was 2 inches too short. You had to be 5'8" in order to be in the MPs. Then they transferred me to B Company, and I was restricted to the area. I never got to go home from the time I went in the Army. I was restricted. They were getting ready to go overseas. And to make a long story short, we sailed for Africa on the 28th of April, 1943, and on the Santa Rosa. It had been an old pleasure ship and made it in a troop carrier. We landed in Casablanca, North Africa, on the 10th of May. The harbor was filled with boats that the French had scuttled. We had a terrible time in getting into the harbor. But they pulled us off of there, and they put us on the truck, and we traveled about 400 miles across a section of the Sahara Desert. For miles and miles, all you could see was just sand. And they took us to a place called Camp Marina, and it was a desolate place. It was a long ways to town. There wasn't any trees or anything around. They had us to pitch our tents, pup tents, in a rocky field, and it was so hot that we had to train overnight a whole lot, and to run out of GI soap. I was on KP, and I had to clean the greasy pots and everything with just a sand. And of course, a lot of the fellows came down with dysentery and sick, and it was a terrible mess. And we stayed there for about 6 weeks, and that's where I qualified as a gliderman. They took a bulldozer and scraped out a little runway, and in order to qualify me, I flew for 15 minutes to qualify me as a gliderman. That's the first training I got as a gliderman. And while those gliders were there qualifying the men, it came a windstorm one day and flipped one of them over on the top. So they just had one to work with. Well, they moved us then from there to the next camp, which was Kairouan. We flew across the section of the Atlas Mountains. At one time we were almost 10,000 feet without any oxygen mask or anything. Went through the gaps of the mountain. And one of the gliders crashed, and I was reported missing in action until they made a complete check of the roll. But this camp that we went to was surrounded with a big high cactus fence all the way around. In the midst was an olive grove, and under each tree we pitched a pup tent and 2 men to the tent that camouflaged from the air so they couldn't see from the air, and dug a couple of slit trenches on either side of the tent in case they had a air raid. We could dive into those pits. And we were under British ration, and they simply like to starve us to death. And I've actually went back for seconds on turnip green juice, believe it or not. And our water supply, they had to haul it in and had these big blister bags with the faucets all the way around. And the way you got your cold water was to fill your canteen with the water, put it in a GI sock and wet the sock hanging up in a tree and let the breeze evaporate and pull the heat out of the water. That's the way we cooled our water. And while we were there, this new, we called it a D-bar chocolate bar came out. It was very, very rich. A couple of our guys were put on guard at the supply dump after this came in, and they decided that they would try some of the chocolate bars, and they eat too much and made them sick. I thought that was very comical. At this particular place is where I told you about your great uncle. They secured an old guitar someplace, and they carried it around in a barracks bag as a carrying case. But somewhere along the line, late in the evening when we'd finished work, we'd go out to the edge of the camp, and we'd sit there on the sand and sang and play till it was bedtime to go to bed. And couldn't go anywhere and couldn't do anything. And somewhere along the line in moving, this guitar got broken, but back of it was all crushed in. I don't know whether somebody stomped it, didn't like our singing, or whether it got broken and moving. But we had a guitar funeral, and I told you about that. Of all the moaning and crying and carrying on you've never heard. They dug a little grave, put the guitar in, and went through the whole ritual. And while we were there, the invasion of Sicily took place. And if you know your history, our own Navy shot down 24 of the C-47s that were to pull the gliders into Sicily, so they couldn't pull us in. And while we were waiting for the invasion, our chaplain, there was some Quonset huts there, a couple of them, and we had a 2 weeks revival. And there were many of the boys that went to the service, and a number of them got saved. And there were 6 of them joined the chaplain's church, which was out in Texas. And on Sunday afternoon, we went out for the baptizing. There's a little place they call a wadi, had water in it. And there was a group of native kids out there swimming in this place. But it was also full of snakes. They had to take sticks and beat them back till they had to baptize. And I'll never forget that. And we moved up on the edge of the Mediterranean coast and began amphibious training. And eventually they brought the C-47s and ferried us over to Sicily. We was supposed to have landed in the north section of Sicily, and instead landed at Gela, which is right in the middle of the battle that was going on at that time. And we had to then take off from the airport and go to where we were supposed to go. There we loaded on the LST, which is landing craft, made the invasion of Salerno, Italy. We went up into the mountains, and then we drove up by night with blackout lights. You can imagine on a crooked mountain road. We run into one vehicle that was coming down and crashed us out of the truck we was in. You couldn't see, it's so dark. But they got things under control there, and they brought us back again to Salerno Beach, and then took us over. We spent the entire night climbing this mountain, which was something like 5,000 feet high. It took us all night to climb it, and we called it the Battle Above the Clouds. You could look out, and the clouds is down below you. There was a German outpost there, and we had a big battle there, and they surrendered some of them and killed some of them, and the rest run. From there we came down off of the mountain and went into Naples, Italy, and they had bombed out the city, and they formed water lines and bread lines for the people. So I served on guard there several days, and we had also a separate line. A lot of the women were pregnant, and we had a special line for them, and then line for the ladies, and what you had to do is to keep some of them was hard-headed. They wanted to buck the line. This one old guy kept shoving and going on. I finally had to hit him with the butt of the rifle to get him back. He didn't understand my Tennessee language, but that was the first to help set up the first city government, and we were staying in an old school building. And it was in that school building that I got that composition book that I wrote down the names of our company roll. I got those names when we shipped out of Naples. I didn't know where we were going, but I wanted to get the address of the men so later that I could stay in contact with them. So I went around to the bunks when they were down below and were on service. Some of them were on guard and KP. I didn't get their address, but that's where I got those. Didn't know where we was going, but we have made a big loop around and got within 200 miles of the coast of the United States. I guess some of the guys knew they was that close that they jumped overboard and tried to swim to shore. But we run into a terrible, terrible North Atlantic storm. I've got some pictures where I stuck my camera out just a crack in the door and took a picture of the waves going across the bow of the ship. And we landed at Belfast, Ireland. And we started training there. We landed just Thanksgiving. And they had the Thanksgiving dinner ready for us on the boat, but they pulled us off and didn't get to eat my Thanksgiving dinner there. And we started training, but the weather was so bad. It wouldn't get light till up about 10 o'clock in the morning, and then about 3 o'clock it began to get dark, and it rained so much. And the old colonel was standing out on a little knoll there with his rubber boots on and tell us to double time, hold our thumbs up, and here we were wading with old GI shoes in that mud. I'll never forget that. Then we moved from there on a Dutch ship over to Leicester, England, and from there we began to train for the invasion, and we moved from there to Camp Edwards, Massachusetts, and we set sail on April 28th and arrived in Casablanca on May the 10th, and then we made that journey across the desert I was telling you about to those camps, and went to Sicily, Italy, and into Ireland, and into Normandy. We came back to Leicester. We started 155 men, and we got back with, if I remember correctly, about 36.
That was after Normandy?
Yes, and picked up. We went 33 days and nights without relief, and picked up replacements, and they raised our quota from 155 men to 195 to go into Holland. And we had gone into Normandy in the British Horsey Glider, and they used American CG-4A to go into Holland, and we didn't have enough pilots to have a co-pilot, so I was acting co-pilot going into Holland. The pilot gave me a little training there, what to do in case of emergency before we took off. And in Holland we stayed there until it was beginning to get cold along toward November. We went in on September 17th. We landed actually in Holland 23rd because bad weather held up. And from Holland we went to Soissons, France, and stayed there until the breakthrough of the Battle of the Bulge, which is 17th December 44. And we led the troops up, rode in open trailers up to Bastogne. That was their objective. But when we got to Bastogne, they changed their objective and sent us on to Vermont, which is farther on up. And the 101st was following after us, and that's the reason they got trapped. The Germans surrounded them. And so we fought in that snow from 17th of December to the 15th of February. And then they pulled us back to France again. And the point